Let's jump right in. Welcome to this explainer. If you're tuning in, I'm guessing you're ready to tackle one of the absolute most complex yet universally human experiences out there: how we actually survive and eventually overcome really severe relational injuries. When we are profoundly wronged, our minds literally scream for a resolution. But what is that actually supposed to look like? Today, we're drawing from some incredibly foundational source materials to rigorously analyze two very different architectures of healing. We're not just going to skim the surface here. We are going to look closely at the exact step-by-step mechanics of how human beings survive betrayal and rebuild their inner worlds. Okay, let's dive into this, because right here is the guiding question for our entire analysis today. For a very long time, popular culture has kind of just handed us forgiveness as the only legitimate finish line for trauma. But honestly, our source material completely challenges that assumption. The big question is forgiveness a prerequisite for healing, or is emotional detachment, when it's done correctly, an equally valid architecture for securing your peace? We're going to explore both of these paths completely impartially. We really want to test the structural integrity of both active grace and unbreachable boundaries. So, here's our roadmap for this explainer. First, we'll look at the guardian of the wound. Second, the trap of retaliation. Then, we'll explore path 1, which is emotional detachment, followed by path 2, active forgiveness, and finally, we'll bring it all together with reclaiming your inner world. All right, starting off with section 1, the guardian of the wound. So diving into our sources, one of the first things that becomes immediately clear is that intense anger over your past isn't just some random emotion, and it is absolutely not a weakness. When you look at the key drivers, anger almost always stems from unresolved injustice. It's just the mind desperately craving the truth, right? Or it comes from unprocessed pain, where anger steps up to act as a heavy shield for your grief, simply because anger feels a whole lot stronger and safer than sadness. It also triggers when your core identity has been violated, or when repeated toxic patterns actually trick your brain into expecting a fresh attack around every corner. And maybe the most profound driver of all, the loss of the life you should have had. That's the anger directed right at that unfair gap between your actual timeline and the one you really deserved. Now, what's really interesting about this concept is how it entirely recontextualizes our understanding of anger. The source material defines it not as some irrational flaw you need to fix, but as a highly deliberate, intelligent signal. Basically, it's your psyche's way of standing up and saying, hey, this mattered. When a secret violation occurs, your mind deploys anger to firmly reassert your self-respect. So you don't stay angry just because you're stubborn. You stay angry because the wound hasn't been properly contextualized yet. Your mind is quite literally acting as the guardian of your most vulnerable parts. Which brings us to section 2, the trap of retaliation. There's an old saying that captures this perfectly. Holding a grudge doesn't punish the offender, it punishes you by letting them live rent-free in your mind. I know it's a really bitter pill to swallow, but holding on to bitterness just for a fleeting sense of power, it's a complete illusion. Just think about it for a second. When you're constantly scorekeeping and meticulously calculating your responses, you've essentially taken on a mentally exhausting, completely unpaid full-time job. You are literally handing the remote control of your own nervous system directly back to the exact person who hurt you. Your mood, your peace, your daily well-being, they all remain entirely dependent on what they did to you. And that is a massive trap. Let's look at how we get out of that trap. Section 3, Path 1, Emotional Detachment. Contrasting these two concepts side by side really clarifies everything. Forgiveness is primarily about the relationship itself and the intentional canceling of a debt. Boundaries, conversely, focus entirely on your self-respect and actively reducing access to you. Our sources highlight a pretty harsh truth here. Sometimes a wound is just too severe, or an offender is way too hostile for forgiveness to actually be safe. In those specific cases, shifting your focus from expecting a repair to ruthlessly enforcing boundaries isn't a failure. It's a brilliant, highly protective choice made by your psyche to preserve your sense of self. Let's move along and see how this builds into a really concrete strategy for personal sovereignty. Step 1 is cognitive separation. This is where you break that emotional fusion and realize, deeply, that their actions reveal who they are, not who you are. Step 2 is boundary enforcement. Now, these aren't just invisible brick walls. They are highly intelligent filters designed to protect your peace by significantly reducing contact. Step 3 is emotional neutrality. This is where you essentially starve the emotional loop until the dominant feeling you have is simply, you know what? This is no longer my problem. And finally, step 4, identity re-anchoring. Firmly, intentionally rooting your future far, far away from the site of the original wound. Think of it this way. Emotional detachment is basically the psychological equivalent of closing a heavy door and locking it from the inside. It's not about pretending you don't care. Not at all. It is the quiet, unbreakable decision that this offender no longer gets to script your inner world, period. This process stops the past from dictating your future. It finally allows your nervous system to stop endlessly ruminating, find some actual mental quiet, and start genuinely healing. Now let's explore the alternative architecture. Section 4, Path 2, Active Forgiveness. So, the crucial point is that true forgiveness isn't just a fleeting feeling. It actually operates as a structured three-part agreement that you make with yourself. Promise 1, I will not dwell. You actively, consciously redirect your mind when it starts drifting back to the wound, point-blank refusing to let it define you. Promise 2, I will not use, meaning, in future conflicts, this old debt is permanently off the table. You don't weaponize it. And promise 3, I will not spread. You firmly close the door on gossip and reputational damage. It's a highly disciplined, rigorous framework that completely reshapes how you relate to the event moving forward. Think about the imagery of releasing a captive dove. It isn't just a nice poetic metaphor. It's biologically accurate. Releasing the offender from your own internal mental courtroom is fundamentally a gift you are giving to your own body. Popular culture loves to frame forgiveness as a favor you do for the offender, but the science on this is wild. Actively releasing retribution physically correlates with significantly lower blood pressure, stronger immune function, and far better sleep. By dropping the case, you stop settling for petty revenge and create room for a higher justice. Ultimately, you heal yourself. Let's bring this all together. Section 5, Reclaiming Your Inner World. And this entire process brilliantly illustrates our ultimate goal, regardless of which path you choose, taking control of the narrative and permanently canceling the debt. The past is a teacher, guys, not a warden. You heal by deliberately deciding what the experience is going to mean for your future. You take the painful lesson, you forge it into an ironclad boundary or a higher standard for your life, and you ensure that the scar becomes a vital part of your wisdom, rather than some heavy, ancient scroll you have to drag around forever. You reclaim the pen, you write a completely new story. But to make that new story really stick, you have to re-anchor your identity. True, lasting healing happens when you build a present life that is so robustly rooted, so full of safe, reciprocal connections and deeply meaningful goals that the harm from the past essentially becomes completely irrelevant. You have to root your sense of self in your future and your core values. When you do that, your future simply becomes much, much louder than whatever they did to you in the past. It all boils down to this one powerful truth. Forgiveness is optional. Freedom is not. True emotional sovereignty means understanding that while you've never, ever have to absolve anyone to heal, you absolutely do have to stop letting them shape your inner world. You are not obligated to serve a life sentence in a prison built entirely from someone else's failure. The architecture of your peace is entirely in your hands right now. You have the blueprints for both profound emotional detachment and transformative, active forgiveness. The past no longer gets to dictate your responses. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a question to really mull over. Which path will you choose today to reclaim your inner world?